Good morning. I want to talk today about why I think the stars will be much happier if Kamala Harris is elected president. So let's see if I can share my screen and we'll get started. Now, as usual, I have to get rid of a few panels so I can see what I'm doing. So this will just take a second. And I think we're ready to go. Why the stars will be much happier if Kamala Harris wins the presidential election. Now, before I start, let me state that I do have a bias here. I am for Kamala Harris for president, and I am extremely strongly against Donald Trump ever stepping foot in the White House again. Like many, I see him as a threat to democracy. And while I'm pretty sure that Kamala Harris will probably win the popular vote, the Electoral College, uh, which distorts these days quite often the popular vote, I understand it's very close in the Electoral College. And so once again, it's possible that the person who does not get the popular vote, Donald Trump, could become president once more. But I'm hoping not. And in this presentation, I want to make the case that because of the way the world is changing, things will probably go better if Harris is elected president than if Trump is elected president once again. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to look at a lot of changes that have already happened, some that we're in the midst of now, and some that are yet to come. The basic thesis here is that we are in a time of extreme change to the world and to America in particular. And we need someone in charge who is in sync with those changes. The more the president or leaders are in sync with the shifting sands of time, the changes that are occurring, the better things will probably go for America and the world. Okay, now with that said, let me go ahead and start. And I'll just read this. Do I know who will win the presidential election in America this November? No, I don't. And even if I utilize all the tools of astrology, I still don't know because all that astrology gives us is just a weather report. However, using that weather report, I can certainly make some determinations regarding the probability of a successful outcome for each candidate, as well as the issues that each one may have to face as the election draws near. And by those measures, many astrologers are saying that this may be a close election. However, our astrological weather report is only half the picture. The other half is how individuals around the country respond to that weather, and also the choices that each candidate decides to make in response to those astrological influences. Those free will choices are the part that astrology cannot predict. And so, no, I don't know who the next president of the United States of America will be, but I do hope that will be Kamala Harris. Additionally, I can state unequivocally that if the stars themselves could vote in elections, then they would also probably be in favor of electing President Harris. And there is a very simple reason for this. We are currently living in and have been living in since 2020 a time of great change, and only one candidate, Kamala Harris, is pursuing an agenda that is aligned with the kind of future that we're currently hurtling towards. And that is why I say that the stars would be much happier if Kamala wins. Of course, it is also possible that Donald Trump will win, but if he does, I don't think that he has the kind of forward-looking agenda that the times demand. And if he is elected, then I think America will be in for a lot of pain as he tries to take us in one direction while the winds of astrology are blowing in another. For instance, as climate change intensifies, it will make a lot of difference whether we have a president who understands the problem versus one who denies it. So I'm very much hoping that Vice President Harris soon becomes President Harris. All right, and with that as an introduction, let's look at some of the outer planet conjunctions, sign changes, and aspects that are driving this time of change. Now, you might want to pause at this point and look at this chart or take a screenshot of it. It's showing for outer planets, basically Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Chiron, and the North Node, all the sign changes and conjunctions they will make with one another from 2020 through the end of 2029. So this is probably going to be a very useful reference. All right. I'm going to begin with Pluto in Capricorn. This went from 2008 to 2024. And with Pluto transiting through Capricorn from 2008 through 2024, there was the expectation that there would be transformations of structures and a rise in right-wing authoritarianism. And that has certainly taken place, beginning with the collapse of the housing market in America, the invasions by Putin, the rise of both Viktor Orban and Donald Trump, supply chain disruptions, and movements toward isolationism, such as America First and Brexit. Happily, the next journey for Pluto will be its sojourn through Aquarius that began in 2023 and continues until January 2044. While not everything will be beautiful during this period, we can count on an emphasis on technology, humanitarianism, and power shifting from individuals to groups. This is very much a power to the people time. In America, we've seen this recently with the resurgence of unions, successful labor strikes that have taken place, as well as protests for various current political issues like things happening in Gaza and the Middle East. Okay, let's move on here. The next thing I want to highlight is the Saturn-Pluto eclipse conjunction of 2020. With this January 10, 2020 lunar eclipse also closely conjunct the Saturn and Pluto, I should say the Saturn and Pluto conjunction. You can see that over here. Sun at 20 degrees Capricorn, Saturn and Pluto both at 22 degrees Capricorn, and 2 days later they become exactly conjunct. So this is a lunar eclipse, moon opposite at 20 degrees, Cancer, sun and moon both close to the lunar nodes. Okay. The late great astrologer Andre Barbo foresaw in 2010 the possibility of a global pandemic emerging at this time. 2 days after this eclipse, my wife and I contracted COVID while traveling through Great Britain, and the pandemic went on to affect everyone's life forever. So my wife and I were in London, arrived on the day of the eclipse. 2 days later, I came down with a light case of COVID. She came down with a very severe case of COVID. COVID was not really on people's and most doctors' radar at that point. So we just thought it was a weird kind of flu that persisted. A doctor prescribed some antibiotics, which helped only marginally. And I'm very lucky that my wife survived this, but we were probably among the first in Great Britain to have COVID. And that was a big change for the world. Okay. I also want to mention the Barbo Planetary Cycle Index from 2020 through 2022. Now, the Barbo Planetary Cycle Index is a cumulative sum of the distances between the outer planets Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. When the index is low, the outer planets are bunched close together, and an imbalance is created. Barbo also foresaw a heightened possibility of a pandemic at the start of 2020 because this index was approaching the low for the entire century at that time. We were probably about here at the start of 2020, just going into the very bottom for the entire century. And this index reached its absolute century low on both March 23rd and 25th of 2022, just a month after Russia invaded Ukraine. And that month was the darkest time I've ever experienced in my life. Fortunately, the index is much higher now as the outer planets are separating from one another. So I think we're about here now on the Barbo Planetary Index. We're moving up early in 2025. I think we take a brief dip and then we continue on up. Okay. Next indicator of change, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction of 2020. The Jupiter-Saturn conjunction of 2020 was momentous because it was the beginning of a long series of Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions in air signs that will last until 2199. The previous cycle, that began in 1842, saw a series of conjunctions that took place in Earth signs every 20 years and symbolized materialism. Now, however, the emphasis will be on group collaborations, ideas, technology, humanitarianism, and relationships. So this is a big shift. For roughly the next 200 years, we will be seeing these conjunctions occurring in air signs rather than earth signs. And this is a shift away from the frenzy of materialism we've been caught up in. It's going to be more about communication, and ideas, and technology, and relationships with one another. Those things symbolized by Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. The times they are changing, and the next big indicator of change is Pluto in Aquarius from 2023 to 2044. Okay, the shift from Earth signs to air signs signaled by the 2020 conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn at 0+ degrees of Aquarius is further strengthened by the time Pluto will spin in Aquarius from 2023 to 2044. This will be a period that will see tremendous growth in technology, an increase in alliances and group collaborations of all sorts, and a further shift of power to the people. We're already seeing in America a resurgence of unions. However, groups can oppress just as easily as individuals can. And we're already seeing some of the dangers related to the rapidly expanding field of artificial intelligence. But these same Aquarian energies may also bring us nuclear fusion in the near future. Every now and then I see some news stories about nuclear fusion, and there are predictions that within 20 years it will be commercially available. And that will basically give free, non-polluting energy to the planet. I hope that comes to pass. The really big thing that coincided with the move of Pluto into Aquarius in 2023 was artificial intelligence, the rise of artificial intelligence. And I think Chat GPT became available on the internet. I read where one astrologer said it became available on the very day that Pluto moved into Aquarius. I haven't checked that out, but it sounds like it could be true. Certainly, once Pluto moved into Aquarius in 2023, there was a lot more buzz about artificial intelligence. And now we're also trying to grapple with the dangers and the misinformation that artificial intelligence uh, could also bring us. Okay, but again, the times they are a changing. Okay, next change on my list is Jupiter conjunct Chiron in 2023. This isn't talked about by a lot of astrologers, uh, particularly those who see Chiron as only as something that brings about wounding. However, if you think of the planets as representing psychological drives inside of us, what sense does it make for us to have a drive to wound ourselves? I don't think that's what Chiron is really about. And I've got a very tight opposition between Uranus and Chiron in my chart. It's just 3 minutes from being exact. Uranus is conjunct my third house cusp. Chiron is conjunct my ninth house cusp. Chiron is in Capricorn. And so throughout my entire life, I have sought enlightenment through ancient wisdom. And as I have researched the role of Chiron in my life, and also looked at the history of things like Jupiter Chiron conjunctions, I feel like I've come to a very good understanding of Chiron. And as some other astrologers have also concluded, Chiron, its orbit is in between Saturn and Uranus, sometimes going inside the orbit of Saturn, sometimes outside the orbit of Uranus. It is a bridge between the visible world, the planets we can see with the naked eye, and the invisible world, those outer planets we can't see with just our eyes. So what Chiron really is, it's this urge within us to transcend the visible world. It's that voice within us that says, there must be something more than this. Okay? And it's only when our hard Saturnian shells have to be cracked to let the light in so that we can transcend. It's only when something like that happens that we get wounded. Uh, and that happens a lot when Chiron is affecting the masses. But conjunctions of Jupiter and Chiron always bring forth something joyous that endures and that reflects the sign that the conjunction occurs in. Past conjunctions have brought us television, the United Nations, the Beatles, Star Wars, Harry Potter, and Obama and the Affordable Care Act in America. The last conjunction in Aries coincided with the filming of Star Wars, which portrayed the Jedi Knights as spiritual warriors. That was a conjunction in Aries, I believe, in March of 1976, the month that they began to film Star Wars, and introduced this new religion, the Force, the idea that there's this force that connects everything in the universe. And the Jedi Knights, they were spiritual warriors for the Force. Okay, now, the recent conjunction in March of 2023 was also in Aries, and it was followed the next day by the moving Everything Everywhere All at Once, which brought forth the multiverse as enduring concept. It wasn't until some months later that I got to see that movie, but as soon as I saw that, I realized this is exactly the sort of thing I was expecting from this recent conjunction of Jupiter and Chiron in Aries. And that movie, Michelle Yeoh, she was definitely a spiritual warrior. But the new and enduring concept that was introduced was that of the multiverse and how we can use the multiverse to help us solve problems in our world. Okay, now, during that same month, uh, filming and production began on an Apple TV series called Dark Matter. It was an adaptation of a book, a novel by the same name, and the central theme of that story was also a multiverse. And in summer of 2023, the Flash movie came out, and that was also about the multiverse. And I read in the news that there were a lot of people who had to be educated about the concept of the multiverse. They were not familiar with it, and that made the film somewhat confusing to them. Now, there were earlier mentions of the multiverse in popular media. For instance, in the Spider-Man movies and Doctor Strange movies, they also utilize the concept of the multiverse. I see those as things that were foreshadowing this Jupiter-Chiron conjunction. But definitely going forward, I think the multiverse, it's now going to become something that people commonly know about and think about. And some people, as Michelle Yeoh did in Everything Everywhere All at Once, some people will learn how to use the multiverse to help them solve their own problems with their consciousness. They can imagine or travel to a different life where whatever problems they're having now, they've already solved. And they can look to see how those problems were solved and how they can apply their solutions to this life. So, uh, these Jupiter Chiron conjunctions always bring about the sweeter side of Chiron and introduce something transcendent, joyous, and enduring into the world. Okay, the April 8, 2024 solar eclipse. This was a big one. And I think a lot of astrologers miss the most important aspect of this eclipse because they don't utilize or have a good understanding of Chiron. So on April 8, 2024, there was a solar eclipse where the sun, moon, and Chiron were all conjunct at 19 degrees, 24 minutes of Aries. As I say, that's going to leave a mark. Many that saw it experienced the joy and awe of Chiron, but many others since then have experienced a year of wounding. Particularly impacted have been America and the Middle East, as well as myself. I was in bed for almost 2 months from a series of back injuries. And I'm still only about 95% recovered. Still in the process of getting better. Okay, now, I sometimes call Chiron the LSD of planets. That is because while it wants to bring us into this larger, more joyous, more transcendent reality, we often get wounded in the process. And so that makes it kind of analogous to LSD. Okay, now Israel, Netanyahu, Hamas, and Iran all had planets or midpoints that were strongly activated by the April 8, 2024 solar eclipse. Plus, many of the outer planets were close to the same positions they occupied on October 7th, 2023. So I was expecting kind of a repeat, a ratcheting up of conflict in the Middle East because of that. Also, there was a heightened risk of direct war with Iran. Iran, it had, I think maybe it had Pluto at 19 degrees of Libra, directly opposite this eclipse point in Aries. And that war almost happened. Fortunately, cooler heads on both sides pulled everything back from the brink. They did symbolic gestures and they realized that an all out conflict wasn't going to be beneficial to either side at this time. Okay, as expected, there has been terrific wounding in the Middle East, and the conflict may continue for several months to come, unfortunately. Now, the eclipse was exactly conjunct the Sun Pluto midpoint in the July 2nd, 1776 chart for America. Uh, Many astrologers, of course, now use the July 4th Sibley chart for America, but a lot of mundane astrologers prefer this July 2nd, 1776 chart because this was when the Declaration of Independence was actually passed by the Continental Congress. On July 4th, it was printed up, distributed to the people, and General Washington was notified of the July 2nd vote. Okay, so what I say here, even though I use this July 2nd chart, what I say here, it's going to apply to July 4th charts. Also, things may be off by a day or two, but that's nothing when you're talking about transits from slow planets. Okay, well, with Sun, Moon, and Chiron exactly conjunct the Sun Pluto midpoint in this chart, the Sun represents the ruler of a country. Pluto is power, death, and transformation. Chiron often manifests as wounding, even though it really wants to bring about transcendence. And that conjunction, I think, contributed to Joe Biden's political wounding and the passing of the baton to Kamala Harris. Um, Fortunately, Biden did not die as a result of this eclipse, but uh, his power was wounded and he rose to the occasion. Let me go back. He rose to the occasion. He also expressed that more transcendent nature of Chiron, and he did the gracious thing and passed the baton on to Kamala Harris, who is now doing well in the polls. Okay, this eclipse was followed by the first of three Chiron returns for America in 2024 and 2025. And these returns often manifest in America's political wounding, involving a leader such as Richard Nixon or Donald Trump. Uh, in America's July 1776 charts, there is an opposition between Saturn and Chiron. And in the early 70s, Chiron first made three oppositions to Saturn, followed by three conjunctions with natal Chiron. And in recent years, we have been going through the same thing. We've completed three oppositions to natal Saturn, and to date, we have completed one conjunction with natal Chiron. I think that was on April 20th. And we have two more conjunctions coming up, one immediately after the November 5th election. And back in the early 70s, the issue was Watergate and Richard Nixon. Now the issue is the January 6th insurrection, the future of democracy, and Donald Trump. Okay. Looking at the United Kingdom, King Charles, Princess Kate, and also in Europe, Pope Francis, they were all directly affected by the eclipse. King Charles and Princess Kate, they both came down with cancer. Pope Francis, he is very old. He is in very frail health. He has the best doctors attending to him. So far, he's hanging in there. But there are a lot of astrological challenges he's gone through the summer and that lie ahead. And so there's a good chance that he will have to step down or vacate the papacy one way or another before the end of the year. And with the conjunction directly opposite my sixth house Neptune at 19 degrees Libra, I was bedridden with painful back problems for 2 months that were triggered by a long sesquiquadrant transiting Saturn to my sixth house natal Mars. My sixth house Mars is in Scorpio, but Saturn is also, my natal Saturn is also in Libra in my sixth house. So I have a history of structural problems with my lower back. All right, let's talk now about Pluto in Capricorn in fall of 2024. Up here, you can see the movement of Capricorn throughout this year. Uh, it first dipped into Aquarius briefly in 2023, but then moved back into Capricorn. In 2024, on January 20th, it went back into Aquarius, turned retrograde on May 2nd, entered Capricorn again for about 2.5 months on September 1st, moving retrograde. It will turn stationary direct on October 11th and finally re-enter Capricorn on November 19th, where it will spend about the next 20 years, and it will never return to Capricorn again during our lifetimes. All right, on the one hand, the return of Pluto to Capricorn is expected to embolden dictators and political strongmen worldwide from September through most of November. One might also think that this would strengthen a conservative presidential candidate like Donald Trump, but that is not necessarily the case. Since Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, I think it is more likely that voters will gravitate to whichever candidate they perceive as being more in control and able to handle the reins of government. Thus, if Trump is able to convey this image, then he will make gains. But if Harris is the one who appears stronger and more in control, then she will make favorable gains. Pluto will remain in the last degree of Capricorn, what we call the anaretic degree, until November 19. And the last degree often brings out the worst of that sign as its influence is dying to be replaced soon by the influence of the next sign. You know, when something is dying, decay occurs. All the schmutz within you starts to come out into the open. And that is what it happens, in particular, when one of these slow moving planets is nearing the end of one sign and about to go into the next. The old has to die so that the new can live. Okay, hence, I would not be surprised to see a conservative turn from September 1st until October 11th. That is when Pluto is moving retrograde through Capricorn. It stays at that 29th degree, never gets beyond that. On October 11th, it'll turn direct again. So, after that, I suspect that people will again yearn for the promise of freedom, scientific advancement, and power to the people that Aquarius offers. And on November 19, Pluto will again return to Aquarius, where it will remain for approximately the next 20 years. And it will never return to Capricorn again in our lifetimes. So, once Pluto turns direct on October 19th, it'll still be in Aquarius. I'm sorry, it will still be in Capricorn until November 19. But I think people are going to be yearning for it to get back into Aquarius. And that is going to bode well for the more progressive candidate in the November 5th presidential election in America. Okay, let's take a look at Mars opposite Pluto in 2024, 2025. You can see here Mars will be exactly opposite Pluto on November 3rd, just 2 days before America's presidential election. It will be opposite Pluto again on January 3rd and one more time on April 27th. So Mars will be in opposition to Pluto 3 times in 2024-2025. The first time will be with Pluto at 29 plus degrees of Capricorn on November 3rd, just 2 days before the American presidential election. And this could trigger some violence or other ugliness from those who are still holding on to authoritarian models of power. The next two oppositions will occur with Pluto and Aquarius, and so the emphasis may be less on violence and more on innovative actions and organized strikes and protests that bring more power to the people. Now, the November 3rd opposition that could bring about violence not only in America, but other places in the world that are resonating with this particular opposition. But there will be a big difference, I think, between this one in Capricorn and the next two, which are in Aquarius. Uh, the next two will involve more group action, I believe, more power to the people, as we say when Pluto is going through the sign of Aquarius. And by the way, we tend to think about the good side of Pluto and Aquarius more than the bad side. But as I've said previously, groups can oppress just as easily as single individuals can. And the last time Pluto went through Aquarius, we saw the American Revolution and the French Revolution. Uh, both of those transferred power to the people. But during the French Revolution, we also saw Robespierre's reign of terror. And that was a very negative impact or expression of group action. Okay. The USA presidential election, November 5th, 2024. I just want to let you look at this chart for a minute. And yes, Mars is still strongly opposite Pluto. The exact opposition occurs 2 days earlier on November 3rd. Jupiter is also in a strong opposition to Venus, Jupiter in Gemini, Venus in Sagittarius. Basically, the expansive ideas that some people are having, they're not going to sit well with everyone. Okay, so we got those two things going on. But look at all the sextiles and trines we have as indicated by the lines in blue. We have just a tremendous amount of harmony going on in this chart. And we have like what some people call a mini grand trine here. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are in a very favorable configuration. That is bringing in higher, more transcendent thoughts and energies into the planet. The majority of the people will be only subconsciously aware of those thoughts. Others will be consciously aware that something new is being born, and they will nurture uh, and run with those new thoughts, those new ideas, those new energies. So, new things are taking place, new things are being born at this time. And notice we also have Jupiter making a very, very strong sextile to transiting Chiron. And transiting Chiron at 20 degrees Aries, it's strongly conjunct, not exact yet, but strongly conjunct natal Chiron in the USA chart. And all the July 1776 charts, Chiron is at 20 degrees Aries. And with Jupiter being a benefic, with the sextile being an easy, harmonious aspect, showing harmony between these two drives, this too will bring out the sweeter side of Chiron. And this also bodes well for whichever candidate is more forward looking and more transcendent in their worldview. And of the two, I would definitely say that is Kamala Harris and not Donald Trump. So there may be some violence or disturbing rhetoric around the time of this presidential election, but there are also a lot of very uh, harmonious aspects going on. And I think that's going to make it very interesting and favor one candidate over the other. Okay, now let's look in a little bit more detail about the USA Chiron returns in 2024-2025. Here you can see when they'll occur and when Chiron moves retrograde and when it moves direct. And there will be exact Chiron return on November 8th, 2024, just a few days after the presidential election. I've talked about these in more detail in some past videos, so you can find those and check them out if you wish. But anyway, when back in the 1970s, transiting Chiron was opposite natal Saturn and then conjunct natal Chiron in the July 1776 charts for America, the country was wounded by the Watergate scandal and the actions of Richard Nixon. He had to resign. And also, a few months earlier, his vice president, Spiro Agnew, had to resign uh, as a result of his own illegal actions. All right, this time around, the country has been wounded by the January 8th insurrection and the actions before and afterwards by Donald Trump. There's been a tremendous assault on democracy by Donald Trump and his supporters. And we're being further wounded by decisions by the very, very conservative Supreme Court that we now have, decisions that many Americans cannot endure. And the Electoral College has also wounded democracy twice in my lifetime uh, by defying the will of the people. It wounded democracy, I believe, when Al Gore won the popular vote in 2000, but George W. Bush became president. Again in 2016, when Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, but Donald Trump became president. And there is a danger that the same sort of travesty could happen again on November 5th. Uh, Vice President Harris could win the popular vote, but the electoral college vote could make Trump president. And if so, that would be another tragic distortion of our democracy. Let's hope that does not happen. Because if it does, I don't think our democracy will last much longer. All right. The first Chiron return in this current series took place on April 20th, shortly after the momentous April 8th solar eclipse. The second Chiron return takes place right after the presidential election. But since transiting Jupiter will sextile both transiting and natal Chiron, we may experience the sweet, joyous, and transcendent side of Chiron more than we do wounding. And the final Chiron return will occur on February 17th, 2025. Now, there's also going to be this Chiron eclipse point activation in 2024-2025 that can also be very important. Again, I haven't heard about other astrologers talking about this. Here you can see The important dates for Chiron. On April 8th, of course, we had Sun, Moon, Chiron exactly conjuncted 19 degrees, 24 minutes of Aries. On July 26th of this year, Chiron went retrograde. On December 29th, it will go direct. In between, on November 29th, 2024, Chiron is going to return to that eclipse point, 19 degrees, 24 minutes of Aries. On January 28th, 2025, it will return for a third time to that eclipse point, 19 degrees, 24 minutes of Aries. And that is when wounding can be repeated. And this is why I think there is a good chance that things in the Middle East, the sad conflict will last for several more months to come. People could take the high road, do something more transcendent, but I'd be pleased if that happens, but you can't count on it. So on November 29th, 2024 and January 28th, 2025, transiting Chiron will revisit the position it was at during the April 8, 2024 solar eclipse. And this could bring about aftershocks of whatever was unleashed during the April eclipse. In particular, there could be issues related to the Middle East, America, and the royal family in the United Kingdom. Also, Pope Francis could be affected as well, and even I could be affected because I've got my sixth house Neptune at 19 degrees Libra, directly opposite this eclipse point. So, as I always say, let's be careful out there. And remember, this is just the weather report. What happens also depends upon your decisions, your choices. The weather report is only half the picture. Okay, there's going to be an interesting Mars retrograde in 2024, 2025. Here you can see Mars turns retrograde on December 6, 2024, and then goes stationary direct on February 23rd, 2025. However, Mars will enter the retrograde zone on October 4th, 2024. It will turn retrograde on December 6th, 2024. Hence, many issues that arise during this period from October 4th to December 6th may be revisited when Mars goes retrograde. And since our presidential election in America occurs during this time frame, October 4th to December 6th, it might be one of the issues that is revisited in one way or another. At the time that planet turns retrograde or direct, it slows down, and this will increase the power of Mars to produce either positive action or negative aggression. Also, in the July 1776 charts for America, Mars will be conjunct the North Node at 6+ degrees of Leo when it turns retrograde, and this could intensify its impact on America at that time. So, all the July 1776 charts have the North Node of the Moon at 6 degrees Leo, the South Node at 6 degrees Aquarius. When Mars turns retrograde, it will be moving very slowly, and so it's really going to linger in this conjunction with the North Node at 6 degrees of Leo. That will further intensify the impact of Mars on America. Will it be negative impacts, violence in the streets? Will it be good impacts, positive actions taken? Again, I don't know. That depends upon the choices that people make. But there's certainly a potential here for something related to Mars to happen as its energy is intensified both by moving so slow and by being conjunct the North Node in America's July 1776 charts. I'm expecting some definite impact on America from this. Okay, on February 23rd, 2025, Mars will slow down again as it turns direct, and anyone with a planet at 17 plus degrees of a cardinal sign could be impacted by the slowdown. Also, from February 23, 2025 until Mars leaves the retrograde zone on March 1st, 2025, those issues from October 4th, 2024 to December 6th, 2024 that were revisited when Mars went retrograde may finally reach some sort of resolution. As I said, this could impact the election in America. The election in America could be one of those issues that is revisited for several months, either in terms of overthrowing the election or just asking, how could it happen we got this result rather than some other result? If Trump once again loses the popular vote but wins the electoral college vote, there may be a lot of loud voices during this period saying we've got to get rid of the electoral college. We've got to straighten out our democracy in America. Okay, looking a little further ahead, Uranus will be in Gemini from 2025 through 2033. Here you can see the graph showing when it dips into Gemini, what stays in Gemini, and when it starts to dip into Cancer. All right, Uranus will enter Gemini in 2025 and won't leave Gemini for Cancer until 2033. This sojourn through Gemini is expected to stimulate much creative thought that will undoubtedly help fuel the many technological revolutions that are anticipated as Pluto moves through Aquarius. However, between July 2027 and May 2028, America will experience 3 Uranus returns, and that could signal conflict and revolution either within or without the country. America has experienced 2 previous periods of Uranus returns. The first was 1860-1861, the time of the American Civil War. The second was from 1943 to 1944, when America was already fighting in World War II, and the Manhattan Project to enrich uranium for an atomic bomb began. So, in 1943, when we got the first of this series of Uranus returns, that is when the Manhattan Project began. And it needed to enrich uranium. Uranium, Uranus. It had to get that enriched uranium so it could make an atomic bomb. We often associate the atomic bomb with Pluto because it brings about so much death and destruction, but it's also associated with Uranus and obviously uranium. In astrology, Uranus always breaks up the existing pattern. And that is what an atomic fission reaction is. It's breaking apart these atoms and releasing energy in the process. Okay, so it is with some trepidation that we look ahead to these coming Uranus returns in 2027 and 2028. Hopefully, we won't be at war internally or externally, but that is what has happened in the past. Okay, 2025, 2026, North Node moves into Pisces. The lunar North Node will be in Pisces from January 2025 until July 2026. This will not only bring issues of compassion to the forefront, it will also likely benefit Kamala Harris since she has Pisces on the cusp of her 10th house of status in society. Trump, on the other hand, has a transiting lunar North Node in his 8th house of death, transformation, other people's money, and debt from January 2024 until June 2025. So far in 2024, Trump has had difficulty fundraising, and courts have ordered him to pay over $537 million in fines and penalties for defamation and other issues. Of course, we have also seen how he has used political fundraising as his own piggy bank to help pay a lot of his legal expenses this year. So, yeah, he's very much into using other people's money to pay his own debts. Okay, a big thing coming up is Saturn and Neptune in Aries 2025 and 2026. Both Saturn and Neptune will move into Aries in 2025, where they will form a near conjunction. And here you can see when that happens and how close they get to one another. It's like around July, August, around July of 2025. And on February 20th of 2026, they will form an exact conjunction at 0+ degrees of Aries. After spending a few years in Pisces having visions, these two planets will now be ready to enact whatever those visions are. This is also a critical time for Russia, since it usually sees major changes during Saturn and Neptune conjunctions. And this goes back as far as the assassination in the 1800s of Tsar Nicholas II. His son, Tsar Nicholas III, succeeded him as Tsar of Russia. And then a year after he took office, there was a Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And Alexander III, he took Russia on a different journey than what his father envisioned. Tsar Alexander II, he was much more liberal politically. He was liberalizing things in Russia. His son, when his son became Tsar, his son took things back in a much more conservative right-wing direction. And every time Saturn and Neptune have come into conjunction since, there have been big changes in the structure of Russia. Saturn rules structure. It can be very conservative, rigid. Neptune, interestingly, dissolves structures. And so we tend to get new political theories and ideologies forming around the time of Saturn-Neptune conjunctions, particularly ideologies that focus on socialism, welfare, which can be implemented in a good way, but can also lead to more oppression, as we've seen in these communist countries. So, the Saturn-Neptune conjunctions in Russia, well, in the 1800s, it coincided with the right-wing policies of Tsar Nicholas III. I'm sorry, Tsar Alexander III. And the early 1900s, around 1917, it coincided with the Bolshevik Revolution. In the early 1950s, it coincided with the death of Stalin and the de-Stalinization of Russia. In 1989, a conjunction coincided with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the subsequent collapse of the Soviet Union. And that was interesting because, like I said, Saturn rules structure, Neptune dissolves structures, and on TV, we literally saw that structure of the Berlin Wall dissolving before our very eyes. The next conjunction, we get the near conjunction in 2025, the exact conjunction on February 20th, 2026. Again, we're expecting some big change in Russia. And so there's a heightened likelihood that Putin might lose power at this time. Of course, the big question is, if he does lose power, what who and what does he get replaced with? And will the changes that occur in Russia will they be changes for the better or changes for the worse? For the worse for Russia and for the world. Now, this conjunction can also be a critical time for America since its civil war began as Neptune last moved into Aries in April 1861. The Civil War in America broke out just the day before Neptune moved into Aries, with Neptune at 0 degrees of Aries. It was making a strong square in that July 2nd, 1776 chart to Venus at 0+ degrees of Cancer. So that is going to be happening again uh, for America. And so both Russia and America are likely to be strongly impacted by the conjunction and near conjunction of Saturn and Neptune that's coming up. Okay, the great moment of 2026. Things become more beneficial as we go into the second half of the 2020s, and the most benevolent day of the century will probably be July 21st, 2026, when all of the planets form very close, harmonious relationships with others. There may be something very good that happens at the time, or it may be just the seeds that are planted at this time. Nevertheless, children born on this day will be extraordinary. We have extraordinary harmony at this moment. Pluto, 4 degrees Aquarius, sextile Neptune, 4 degrees Aries, sextile Uranus, 4 degrees Gemini, sextile Jupiter at 4 degrees Leo. We also have Chiron, 0 degrees Taurus, trine South Node, 0 degrees Virgo, sextile Moon, 0 degrees Scorpio, trine North Node, 0 degrees Pisces, sextile Chiron. Also, a pretty strong sextile between Saturn and Mars, and between Mercury and Venus. So there is incredible harmony on this day. As the song says, this could be the start of something big. This could be the start of some new vision for humanity, new breakthroughs. Uh, some things we may notice immediately. Other things we may be able to point to only some years later in retrospect when we look back and say, this is the day that all those changes began. Either way, the children born on this day, they're going to carry this imprint. And when they become adults, they are going to be uh, enacting the blueprint that was embedded inside of them on this day. It's somewhat like if you look at Kamala Harris and her running mate, Tim Walz, they were both born in 1964, right before the powerful conjunctions and configurations that turned everything upside down in the latter part of the 60s, right on the cusp of this big social revolution that was coming. And now they're both older, nearing their 60s. They're both vibrant candidates for president and vice president of the United States. And they were born under the vision and the promise and social revolution of the 60s, the good parts of that vision. And now they're ready to enact that vision in America if they take office after that November 5th election. Okay, the Uranus-Neptune-Pluto triangle, 2026-2027. What some call a mini grand trine, Neptune sextile Uranus and Pluto, while Uranus is trine Pluto. It's in effect now, but it's going to be particularly strong in 2026, 2027. You can see here and here where they're all close to exact. And the sextile from Neptune to Uranus, it starts in 2025, getting very close, while the sextile between Neptune to Pluto extends from 2026 all the way to 2032. This will be a period during which higher energies and more transcendent perspectives will make themselves felt. Many, though, will only be subconsciously aware of these energies, but an impact will be had nonetheless. Furthermore, children born at this time will grow up with a more transcendent perspective, just as I did as a result of my being born with Neptune-Pluto sextile, a Neptune-Pluto sextile that was only 5 months from being exact. Overall, the second half of the 2020s will likely be a very beneficial time for humanity. And decades later, when the children born at this time grow up, they will be enacting this blueprint in the world. Okay, now let's talk about America's Uranus returns. 2027, 2028. We touched on this earlier, but here you can see the exact dates that they occur. And also when Uranus goes stationary direct, retrograde, and stationary direct again. Now, Uranus will be in the retrograde zone from May 29th, 2027. That zone starts at 5 degrees 56 minutes Gemini. It'll be in that zone until May 29th, 2028, when Uranus is at 9 degrees 57 minutes of Gemini. There will be 3 Uranus returns, but the most intense time for America will likely be September through November of 2027, when Uranus turns retrograde at 9 plus degrees of Gemini. See that right here. Moves very slowly and spends an extended length of time in conjunction with natal Uranus at 8 plus degrees of Gemini and the July 1776 charts for America. So 9 degrees 57 minutes Gemini, that's not that far away from 8 degrees some minutes of Gemini and the July 1776 charts for America. So at best, this could be a time of great innovation and innovation for America. We'll probably get some of that, but at worst, it could be a time of war and revolution, or it could be both. I'm hoping for the best, but we'll probably get some of the worst also. Okay, and this brings us to the bottom line. To sum it up, we have been going through several trials and tribulations since 2020. But the 2020 Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at 0 plus degrees of Aquarius was the first indication of a major shift away from materialism to a world where innovation, ideas, and relationships will be what's valued. This shift was followed by another big one when Pluto first moved into Aquarius in 2023. And this will be followed by Uranus moving into Gemini, Neptune, and Saturn. Uranus moving into Gemini, Neptune, and Saturn moving into Aries, the great moment of harmony in July 2026, the Uranus-Neptune-Pluto triangle of 2026-2027, and all the other beneficial aspects that will occur in the latter half of this decade. There are also significant changes ahead for America. But the bottom line is that we're living during a decade of rapid change and a shifting of values and orientations as we move into the future. Thus, while either candidate could win America's election on November 5th, 2024, by the way, I don't fail to notice that November 5th is also the date of the attempt by Guy Fawkes in England to blow up a parliament. And so every year they celebrate the fact that Guy Fawkes failed to do that. And but nonetheless, this very date it seems to be linked to revolution, which is makes it a little bit more ominous for America. Also, interesting bit of trivia. At the trial of Guy Fawkes, my ancestor was the judge, and my wife's ancestor was the prosecuting attorney. Thus, as I say, Guy Fawkes didn't stand a chance. Anyway, while either candidate could win America's election on November 5th, 2024, only one candidate seems poised to lead us into the new future that is ahead. The other appears to want to lead us backward to a time that is rapidly vanishing in order to make way for the new. Either way, change is going to happen, but only Kamala Harris seems ready to embrace that change. And that is why I say that the stars will be much happier with a President Harris than with the alternative. And if Trump wins, I'm sure that darkness will follow. There's a lot of darkness in his first presidency. I think it'll only get worse if he's reelected. I think, despite his denials, he will try to implement a lot of what is in that Project 2025 book. If you're not familiar with that, Google it on the internet and look at what the conservative Republican agenda is. So, again, bottom line is a lot of things are changing. A new world is emerging. The old world, particularly that of authoritarian leaders, exemplified by Pluto's movement through Capricorn, that is a world that is vanishing and going away. So Trump could win this election. He very well could. But I think that many others, and astrology, the stars will be much happier if Kamala Harris wins the election because of the two candidates, she is the one who is more likely to embrace the changes that are coming and help make those changes an easy road ahead for America and the world. Well, let's see. That is going to be it. So let's see if I can stop sharing here. And I'm back. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I talked a lot about changes that have occurred recently and changes that lie ahead. And hopefully America and other countries get leaders that will be in sync and harmony with those changes. So again, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you join me for more videos. But for now, I'll just say so long and be well. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and let's all make the choices that lead us into a better world of peace and harmony and not one of violence and constant wounding. Okay, so long.